"My son's cold, can I borrow your scarf?" the widow asked the rancher at the station on Christmas Day. The wooden benches were dusted with snow, and the cold wind slipped through the gaps in the walls, sending shivers through anyone who stood too long. It was the kind of cold that seemed to reach inside your bones, and anyone without proper warmth felt it deeply. Eleanor Hayes pulled her coat tighter around herself as she held her young son, Thomas, close. His small face was pink from the cold, and he shivered despite the thick coat she had managed to wrap around him. His little hands were tucked under her arms, trying to keep warm, but it wasn't enough. Eleanor could feel the tremble of his body against hers, and a pang of worry tightened her chest. Thomas was only 6, small and fragile, and Eleanor had been trying so hard to keep him safe and healthy through a winter that seemed crueler than ever. The previous year had been hard, harder than Eleanor had ever imagined. She had lost her husband, and their small home on the outskirts of town had burned down in a fire. All of their belongings, their memories, and the sense of comfort they had once known had vanished in a single night. Since then, life had been a series of struggles, finding work, finding food, and finding shelter. Christmas, which had once been a time of laughter and warmth, now felt cold, lonely, and heavy. Eleanor tried to smile for Thomas's sake, but the weight of the world seemed to press down on her shoulders. Thomas tugged at her sleeve, his tiny hands icy against her coat. "Mom," he whispered, his voice soft and almost scared, "I'm really cold." Eleanor hugged him closer, pressing her cheek to his hair. She wished she could wrap him in all the warmth in the world. "I know, sweetheart," she said gently, trying to make her voice sound calm even though her heart was racing. "We'll be okay. Just a little longer and the train will be here." She glanced around the station. There were very few people there that morning. A couple of travelers with large bags were waiting silently, their breath visible in the air, and a station worker hurried past with a broom, sweeping snow from the platform. The quiet made Eleanor feel even more alone. Usually, at least on Christmas, there would be a few more travelers, children laughing, or families hurrying to visit loved ones. But this year, the station felt abandoned, a hollow place echoing with the wind. Then Eleanor noticed him. Standing a little distance away, near the edge of the platform, was a man dressed in rugged clothes. His boots were dusted with snow, and a thick scarf was wrapped around his neck, covering part of his face. He had a tall, broad figure, and there was something steady and strong about him. He seemed familiar with the cold, the way he stood firmly despite the biting wind, and Eleanor felt a tiny spark of hope that maybe he could help. Thomas coughed, a small, sharp sound that made Eleanor's heart skip a beat. She looked down at him, noticing how his nose was red and his lips slightly chapped from the cold. He wrapped his arms around himself, trying to keep warm. Eleanor's mind raced. She didn't know this man. She had never spoken to him, and yet she needed to do something. She couldn't just let her son shiver like this. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor approached the man slowly, clutching Thomas tighter to her chest. She tried to keep her voice calm, even though she felt a lump form in her throat. "Excuse me," she said softly, her words trembling slightly in the cold air. The man turned to look at her. His eyes were kind but alert, like someone who wasn't used to being asked for favors. Eleanor swallowed hard. "My son, he's very cold. Could I borrow your scarf for a little while?" The man looked down at Thomas, then back at Eleanor. He could see the worry in her eyes, the way she held the small boy close, and he noticed the fine line of fatigue in her face. There were no complaints in her voice, only a quiet desperation that made his chest tighten. He hesitated for a moment, unsure if a stranger asking such a thing on Christmas Day was usual, but he didn't need to think for long. The boy was shivering. The mother was frightened. In that instant, it felt like the right thing to do. Slowly, he untangled his scarf from around his neck and draped it gently over Thomas. Eleanor's eyes widened with gratitude, and Thomas blinked up at the man, surprise and relief on his small face. The scarf was thick and warm, and when it touched Thomas's neck, the boy's shoulders relaxed and a small smile appeared. Eleanor's heart lifted. It was a simple act, a piece of cloth wrapped around her son, but it felt like a gift from the heavens. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking slightly. She didn't know the man's name, and she wasn't sure if she would ever see him again. But in that moment she felt a connection, a reminder that even in the hardest times, kindness existed. Thomas clutched the scarf and looked up at the man, his eyes bright with warmth. "It's so warm," he said, his small face lighting up with happiness. The man chuckled softly, the sound low and friendly. "You need to keep him warm," he said. "That's what's important." He stepped a little closer to shield them from the wind, his broad shoulders forming a barrier against the cold. Eleanor felt a sense of relief she hadn't felt in months. She didn't know who this man was, but his small gesture had made her burden feel lighter, if only for a moment. As they waited for the train, Eleanor looked around the station again. The world seemed less harsh now, as if the warmth of the scarf and the stranger's kindness had reached beyond Thomas and her. Snow continued to fall softly, but it no longer felt like a threat. Instead, it was gentle, sparkling, almost like the promise of hope. Thomas leaned against his mother, his small hands tucked into the folds of the scarf. "Mom," he whispered, "do you think Santa knows we're cold?" Eleanor smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I think he knows, sweetheart," she said softly. "And sometimes Santa sends people like him to help us." She looked at the man again, who gave a small nod as if he understood. Eleanor felt a swell of emotion, gratitude, relief, and a tiny spark of joy she hadn't felt in a long time. The world was still hard, the cold still sharp, but there was kindness, and that kindness made it possible to keep going. The scarf wasn't just warmth for Thomas. It was a symbol that even strangers could care, that even on the loneliest Christmas, help could appear in the smallest, quietest ways. As the sound of the approaching train echoed across the station, Eleanor held Thomas close, feeling the steady beat of his heart against hers. For a moment, the fear, the loneliness, and the worry faded. In their place was hope, fragile but real, wrapped in a scarf and offered by a man who didn't know them but had given them exactly what they needed. The train whistle grew louder, signaling that the journey was about to begin. Eleanor took a deep breath and looked at Thomas, then at the man who had helped them. She didn't know what the day would bring, but she knew one thing: her son was warm, and for the first time in a long while, her heart felt a little lighter. The train's whistle faded into the distance, leaving the station quiet once again. Snowflakes continued to fall gently, covering the platform in a soft white blanket. Eleanor held Thomas tightly, his small body still shivering slightly despite the warmth of the scarf. She glanced at the man who had offered it to them. He was still standing nearby, his hands tucked into his coat pockets, watching them with a quiet, steady gaze. Eleanor felt a mix of gratitude and hesitation. She did not know this man. He was a stranger. And yet in just a few moments he had given her son something she could not provide: warmth, comfort, and a small spark of hope. She wondered why he had done it. People often turned away from strangers, especially on a cold, lonely day like this. But he had not. Something about him was different. He seemed patient, kind, and solid, like a rock that could be trusted in a storm. Thomas tugged at Eleanor's sleeve. "Mom, can we talk to him?" he asked, his small voice full of curiosity. Eleanor smiled softly. She had been thinking the same thing. "Maybe we should," she whispered. "But let's be polite. He's a stranger, Thomas. We have to be careful." Taking a deep breath, Eleanor stepped closer to the man. "Excuse me," she said gently, her voice carrying just enough over the sound of the wind. "I don't even know your name." He looked down at her and gave a small nod. "I'm Daniel," he said. His voice was calm, low, and steady, like the sound of distant thunder on a cold day. "Daniel McCall, and you are?" "I'm Eleanor Hayes," she replied. Thomas peeked out from behind her coat, giving a small wave. "And this is Thomas," she added. Daniel smiled faintly, kneeling slightly so he could meet Thomas at eye level. "It's good to meet you, Thomas. You're very brave standing out here in the cold." Thomas blushed and hid part of his face in Alina's coat. I'm not really brave," he mumbled. "I'm just cold." Daniel chuckled softly, the sound warm against the cold air. "That's fair," he said. "Anyone would be cold out here, but you're handling it well." He looked back at Alina. "Your son has a lot of spirit." Alina felt a warmth in her chest. Daniel's words were simple, but they carried a kind of truth she had been needing to hear. She had spent so many months worrying, struggling, and trying to be strong for Thomas that it felt good to hear someone else acknowledge the effort. "Thank you," she said quietly. "It's been difficult this year." Daniel's eyes softened. "I can imagine," he said. He paused, looking out at the snow-covered tracks. "Life can be hard, especially when you're alone, but it's the small things, the kindness of strangers, the little gestures, that sometimes keep us going." Alina nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She wanted to tell him about everything that had happened, the fire, losing her husband, the struggles of the past year, but the words caught in her throat. They felt too heavy for this moment, too heavy to share with a man she had just met. Still, she wanted him to know something of their life. She took a deep breath and tried. We lost our home last winter," she began slowly. "And my husband, he passed away not long after. It's been just Thomas and me ever since." Daniel listened silently, his expression thoughtful. There was no pity in his eyes, only understanding. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "That's a lot for one person to handle, for two." Alina felt a tear slip down her cheek, quickly brushing it away. "It is," she admitted. "Some days it feels like I can't do anything right. I just try to keep him safe and warm." Daniel nodded again, his eyes steady on hers. "You're doing more than just trying," he said. "You're keeping him alive, happy, and cared for. That's not easy. And you're doing it on your own. That's strength, Alina." The wind blew again, sharper this time, and Thomas shivered under the scarf. Alina tightened her hold on him, feeling the chill bite through her coat. Daniel seemed to notice immediately. "You need to get out of the cold," he said. "Even a few minutes in the warmth can make a difference." Alina hesitated. She did not want to impose, but Daniel stepped a little closer. "I know it's Christmas," he said gently, "and I know it's not much, but my cabin is warm. There's a fire, blankets, you and Thomas can sit by the fire for a while. It's not far from here." Alina's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea who this man really was, or why he would offer such a thing, but the idea of warmth, of shelter, of a moment without fear and cold, was almost too good to believe. She looked at Thomas, whose small eyes were wide with hope, and her resolve melted. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Then don't say anything," Daniel replied. "Just come. It's cold and your son needs to be warm, that's all that matters." Alina took another deep breath, trying to steady herself. She knew there was a risk. She had always been careful with strangers, but there was something in Daniel's manner, in the calmness of his presence, that made her trust him. She looked down at Thomas, who was holding onto her coat tightly, and smiled. "All right," she said softly. "We'll go with you." Daniel nodded, a faint smile appearing on his face. He motioned for them to follow, leading the way toward the edge of the platform where a small path in the snow led toward the town's outskirts. Alina followed closely, holding Thomas's hand tightly. Each step into the snow felt lighter now, as if the hope of warmth was giving them strength. As they walked, Alina tried to make conversation, breaking the silence. "Do you live far from here?" she asked. Daniel looked at her, thinking. "Not too far. I have a ranch on the edge of the forest. It's quiet there, peaceful." Alina nodded. She could picture it, a small cabin, smoke rising from a chimney, the smell of firewood and the warmth inside. It sounded like something out of a storybook, and yet Daniel spoke as if it were real. "It sounds wonderful," she said. Daniel shrugged slightly. "It's simple," he said. "Not much, but it's enough. Sometimes simple is better than grand. Thomas piped up, his small voice full of curiosity. "Do you have animals, mister?" Daniel laughed softly. "I do. A few horses, some cows, and a dog named Rusty. He's friendly, but sometimes he thinks he's the boss of everyone." Thomas giggled, his shivers forgotten for a moment. Alina smiled at the sight. It had been a long time since she had seen such genuine laughter from her son. The cold still bit at their fingers and toes, but the warmth of hope was stronger. As they neared Daniel's cabin, the snow seemed softer, the wind less harsh. The cabin itself was small but solid, with smoke curling from the chimney and windows glowing with golden light. Alina felt a deep sense of relief. Here, for the first time in months, she could imagine sitting by a fire with Thomas, feeling safe and cared for. Daniel opened the door and gestured inside. "Come in. Get out of the cold." Alina stepped inside with Thomas, the warmth immediately wrapping around them. The fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and the smell of wood smoke mixed with something faintly sweet like cinnamon. Thomas ran over and touched the flames cautiously, his face lighting up. Alina laughed softly, a sound that felt foreign and wonderful after so many months of struggle. Daniel handed them blankets, and Alina wrapped Thomas in one, feeling him relax against her chest. "Thank you," she whispered again, her voice full of emotion. Daniel waved it off. "No need to thank me, it's Christmas. This is what it's for, helping each other." For the first time that day, Alina allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Thomas leaned against the fire, the scarf still around his neck, and Alina felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. The cold outside was forgotten, replaced by warmth, laughter, and the kindness of a stranger who had shown them that even in hard times, hope could appear in unexpected ways. Alina and Thomas settled in front of the fire, the warmth immediately easing the chill from their bodies. Thomas, his small hands wrapped around the thick scarf, leaned back against the cushions Daniel had offered. He glanced around the cabin with wide eyes. The room was small but cozy. Wooden walls glowed in the firelight, and shelves lined with books and small trinkets gave it a lived-in, welcoming feeling. A simple wooden table held a few bowls and mugs, and a kettle was gently steaming on the stove. The smell of burning wood mixed with a faint scent of vanilla and cinnamon that made Alina's chest feel lighter, almost like the air itself was giving her comfort. Daniel moved around the cabin with quiet efficiency. He stacked some extra firewood near the fireplace and poured hot water into mugs, which he offered to Alina. She accepted it with a grateful nod, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers and palms. Thomas watched Daniel curiously, fascinated by the easy way he moved through the room. "Mr. Daniel," he asked shyly, "do you live here all alone?" Daniel smiled faintly, setting the mugs down on the table. "Most of the time," he said. "It's quiet and I like it that way. But today I have company and that's a good thing." He looked at Alina, his eyes steady and kind. "It's not often that strangers knock on my door in the middle of winter. You and Thomas are welcome." Alina felt a warmth in her chest, not just from the fire. The kindness in Daniel's tone, the simplicity of his words, made her heart feel lighter. She wanted to tell him how much she appreciated it, but words seemed inadequate. She smiled instead, letting Thomas sip some warm water from the mug, careful not to burn his lips. Thomas's eyes sparkled as he watched Daniel. "Do you really have a dog named Rusty?" he asked again, his curiosity getting the better of him. Daniel laughed, a deep, steady sound that filled the small room. "Yes, Rusty is right outside. He likes visitors, but he also likes to test them. Don't worry, he won't bite, well, not really." He winked at Thomas. Thomas giggled and leaned forward, eyes wide with excitement. "Can we see him?" Daniel nodded. "Of course, but you'll have to be careful. It's snowing outside and the ground is cold. I'll go with you." Alina wrapped her coat more tightly around herself and Thomas, and they followed Daniel outside. The snow crunched under their boots, and the cold wind brushed their faces, but the warmth of the cabin lingered, giving them courage. Daniel led them to a small wooden gate, and as he opened it, a large, friendly dog bounded toward them, barking happily. Rusty's fur was thick and golden, and his tail wagged so fast it almost seemed to blur. Thomas gasped with delight. "He's so big!" he exclaimed, holding out his hands cautiously. Rusty sniffed him carefully, then licked his hands, making Thomas laugh with joy. Alina smiled, watching her son's laughter. It was a sound she hadn't heard freely in months, a pure expression of happiness. Daniel watched silently, a faint smile on his face. "He likes you," he said. "Not everyone gets his approval." Thomas hugged Rusty's neck, careful not to fall over in the snow. Alina felt a lump in her throat. She had feared so many things this year: loneliness, hunger, cold. But in this moment there was nothing but safety and warmth. Daniel had opened not just his cabin but also a small corner of his life for them, and it felt like a miracle. After a while, Daniel led them back inside. Alina dried Thomas's wet gloves and helped him sit back by the fire. Rusty settled on the rug nearby, his head resting on his paws. The cabin felt alive with quiet energy. The crackling of the fire, Thomas's soft giggles, and the occasional grunt of Rusty adjusting on the floor. Alina finally found the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind since arriving. "Mr. Daniel, why did you help us? You didn't even know us. It's Christmas, yes, but you didn't have to do this." Daniel looked at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "Maybe because I've been where you are. Maybe because I know what it's like to be cold, hungry, and alone on a day when everyone else seems to have warmth and family. And maybe because sometimes doing the right thing is enough reason." Alina felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them away. His words were simple, yet they struck her deeply. In a world that often felt harsh and uncaring, Daniel's simple honesty was a balm for her soul. "Thank you," she whispered again. Daniel nodded, then shifted the conversation. "Tell me more about Thomas," he said gently. "He seems like a smart, kind boy." "You must be proud of him." Alina smiled, a real smile that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "I am," she said softly. "He's been through a lot, but he's resilient. He's always been strong, even when I haven't felt strong enough for both of us." "He's my reason for keeping going." Daniel nodded. "I can see that. You've done a good job, more than good, you've been amazing. It's not easy raising a child on your own, especially after losing so much." Alina looked down at Thomas, who was now quietly playing with a small wooden toy Daniel had on a shelf. Her heart swelled. "I try," she said. "Some days it feels impossible, but I can't give up. He needs me." Daniel's expression softened. "And he's lucky to have you," he said. "Some people never realize how strong they are until they have no choice. You're stronger than you know." The three of them fell into a comfortable silence, listening to the fire crackle and the wind outside. Alina felt a rare sense of peace. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the crushing weight of loneliness or fear. She felt safe, surrounded by warmth, kindness, and even a small sense of belonging. After a while, Daniel asked if they wanted some Christmas treats he had prepared earlier. Alina hesitated, not wanting to impose, but Thomas's eyes lit up, and she realized that maybe it was okay to accept kindness without hesitation. "We would love that," she said softly. Daniel brought out a small plate with simple cookies and a cup of warm milk for Thomas. Alina smiled as she watched him sip the milk carefully, savoring the warmth and taste. It was not much, but it felt like a feast compared to the cold and empty days they had endured. As the day went on, Alina began to feel a shift inside her. The warmth of the fire, the kindness of Daniel, and the laughter of Thomas reminded her that life could still hold moments of joy, even in the hardest times. She realized that Christmas was not about gifts or grand celebrations. It was about warmth, love, and the small acts of kindness that connected people. Daniel noticed the change in her demeanor and smiled quietly to himself. He had known that the day would be different for them, but seeing Aliner's guarded hope slowly return was a gift in itself. "You don't have to rush back to the world yet," he said softly. "Stay here as long as you like. There's no hurry and it's warm." Aliner nodded, grateful for the offer. She felt as if she had found a small sanctuary, a place where her worries could rest for a while. Thomas leaned against her, and she could feel his soft breathing even out as he grew sleepy from the warmth and comfort around him. By late afternoon, the snow outside had thickened, creating a quiet blanket over the world. Aliner and Thomas sat by the fire, Rusty at their feet, and Aliner finally allowed herself to relax. She looked at Daniel, who was quietly tidying the cabin, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you enough," she said softly. Daniel smiled, shaking his head. "You don't need to. Seeing you both safe and happy is enough. That's the best gift I could ask for this Christmas." Aliner felt tears of relief and joy fill her eyes. It had been a long, lonely year, but in this small cabin with a kind man, her son, and a friendly dog, she felt hope for the first time in months. She realized that sometimes strangers could become unexpected blessings, and that even in the coldest, loneliest moments, warmth could be found in the hearts of others. Thomas, now curled up with a blanket and the scarf still snug around his neck, yawned and rested his head against his mother. Aliner stroked his hair gently, feeling the weight of the day settle around her. She knew challenges would come again, but in this moment, she allowed herself to simply be grateful for warmth, for kindness, and for the small miracle of a stranger who had turned a lonely Christmas into a day of hope. The warmth of the cabin seemed to stretch time itself. Outside, snow continued to fall, coating the world in a silent, sparkling white. Inside, Aliner and Thomas sat near the fire, watching the flames dance, while Daniel moved about quietly, tending to the cabin and making sure everything was comfortable. The air was filled with a peaceful hum, the soft crackle of the fire, the occasional low grunt of Rusty settling into his bed, and the rhythmic ticking of a small clock on the wall. Aliner wrapped a blanket around Thomas, noticing how his small body was finally relaxing. He leaned into her, his head resting against her shoulder, his small hands clutching the scarf Daniel had given him. Aliner's heart swelled as she watched him. It had been so long since she had seen him this calm, this content. The memory of past struggles, the fire, the loss, the cold, still lingered at the edges of her mind, but for the first time in months she allowed herself to breathe, to feel, and to hope. Daniel sat across from them, finally taking a seat after ensuring the cabin was ready for the evening. He leaned back against a chair, his gaze soft but attentive. "You've had a rough year," he said gently. "It's clear in how you carry yourself and in the quiet way you protect Thomas. I can see it. You've been carrying more than anyone should have to." Aliner nodded quietly, feeling a lump in her throat. She had spent so many months trying to be strong, trying to shield her son from the harshness of life, that hearing someone else acknowledge her struggles brought a mix of relief and gratitude. "It's been hard," she admitted softly. "Some days I feel like I'm failing, but I keep going because I have to for Thomas." Daniel's gaze softened. "You're not failing," he said. "You're doing everything you can, and sometimes that's all anyone can do. You're stronger than you realize, Aliner." Aliner felt a small tear slip down her cheek, quickly wiping it away. She wasn't used to kindness without expectation, to words that didn't carry judgment or pity. Daniel's presence was calm, steady, and gentle, like a beacon in the stormy days she had been living through. Thomas stirred, finally lifting his head from Aliner's shoulder. "Mom, Mr. Daniel, can we play a game?" he asked, his small voice filled with curiosity. Daniel smiled, a faint chuckle escaping him. "Of course," he said. "Do you have a game in mind, or should I come up with one?" Aliner watched as Daniel leaned slightly forward, his eyes twinkling. "I know a game we can play inside," he said. "It's a guessing game. You ask questions and I answer and then I ask you. It's simple, but it can be fun. Thomas's eyes lit up and he nodded eagerly. Yes, let's play. The next hour passed in laughter and lightheartedness. Thomas asked endless questions about Daniel's life on the ranch, the animals, the seasons, and even the snow. Daniel answered patiently, often turning the questions back to Thomas, asking what he liked, what he wanted to be when he grew up, and what made him happy. Alina sat quietly, listening, feeling a sense of normalcy that she hadn't known for months. For a few hours, the weight of the year melted away, replaced by joy, laughter, and connection. After a while, Alina realized she had not eaten much since morning. Daniel noticed and moved to prepare a small meal. It's simple, he said as he brought out bread, cheese, and some preserves, but it will keep you warm and full for a while. Alina accepted gratefully, sharing the meal with Thomas, who was chattering excitedly about Rusty, the games, and the snow outside. As they ate, Daniel sat nearby, occasionally joining in the conversation, but mostly allowing them to enjoy their meal in peace. Alina felt a deep sense of gratitude. This simple act of sharing food, warmth, and companionship was more than she had hoped for. After the meal, Daniel suggested they sit by the fire a little longer. The snow is still falling outside, he said. It's too cold to go out and there's no need to rush. Stay as long as you like. Alina looked at Thomas, who was now cuddled in the blanket, eyes wide with wonder as he watched the fire. We would like that, she said softly. Thank you for letting us stay. Daniel smiled faintly. Of course, you're welcome here. As the evening went on, Alina found herself opening up more. She told Daniel small details of her life, the memories of Thomas's father, the fire, the loneliness of the past months, and her constant worry for her son's future. Daniel listened without interrupting, without judging. His presence was calm, his eyes steady and understanding. For Alina, this was a rare gift, the gift of someone truly listening, truly caring. At one point she hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever feel lonely, Mr. Daniel?" "Even with the ranch and animals," Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes," he admitted. "Sometimes I do, but I've learned to find comfort in simple things, routine, nature, work, and sometimes in helping others. Days like today remind me why it's worth keeping your heart open." Alina felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. The words struck her deeply. She realized that even those who seemed strong and self-sufficient needed connection, companionship, and kindness, just like her and Thomas. Thomas, ever perceptive, tilted his head. "Mom, Mr. Daniel, do you think we can come here again?" Alina smiled at him, feeling a spark of hope for the first time in a long while. "I think yes," she said softly. "I think we can." Daniel chuckled. "I would like that," he said. "The cabin is always open for you and Thomas. Not just for Christmas, but any time you need warmth, a meal, or company. That's what neighbors or friends do." Alina's heart swelled. She realized that for months she had been walking through life alone, carrying fear, grief, and worry. But today, a stranger had shown her the simple power of kindness. He had offered warmth, shelter, food, and understanding, not out of obligation, but out of generosity. It was a reminder that hope could appear in the most unexpected places. Outside, the snow continued to fall softly, muffling the world in a quiet, serene blanket. Inside, Alina, Thomas, and Daniel shared stories, laughter, and gentle conversation. Rusty occasionally nudged Thomas, reminding him that life was also about small joys and playful moments. Alina watched the two of them and felt a deep sense of peace she had not known in months. As the night grew darker, Alina realized that the day had changed something inside her. The fear and loneliness that had weighed so heavily felt lighter, as if Daniel's kindness had lifted a portion of the burden. She knew the struggles would not disappear overnight, but she also knew that the world still held goodness, warmth, and people willing to help without asking for anything in return. Finally, as Thomas grew sleepy in her arms, Alina whispered, "Thank you, Daniel." "For everything." Daniel smiled, his voice gentle. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "Seeing you and Thomas safe, warm, and happy is enough. That's the best Christmas gift I could ask for." Alina felt tears in her eyes again, but this time they were not of sadness. They were of relief, gratitude, and a fragile sense of hope. She watched Thomas drift to sleep, wrapped in the blanket and scarf, Rusty curled up at their feet, and the fire crackling softly in the hearth. In that small, cozy cabin, Alina realized that Christmas was not about gifts, decorations, or even perfect celebrations. It was about warmth, kindness, and human connection. It was about strangers becoming friends, about simple acts of generosity that could change a life. And for Alina and Thomas, this Christmas would always be remembered, not for the hardships they had faced, but for the hope and love that had appeared unexpectedly, like a bright light in the darkness. Daniel, sitting quietly across from them, watched the mother and child with a sense of satisfaction. He had not expected to form a bond so quickly, but in the warmth of the firelight and the simple joy of shared company, a connection had been made. He knew that this was not the end of their story, it was only the beginning. The snow fell softly outside, the world quiet and still. Inside the cabin, three hearts were warmed, not just by the fire, but by the gift of trust, understanding, and the simple magic of kindness. And in that moment, Alina, Thomas, and Daniel all understood something important. Even in the coldest, loneliest times, the warmth of human connection could make life beautiful again. The night passed peacefully in the small cabin. Outside, the snow had thickened, covering the landscape in a sparkling white blanket. Inside, the fire had burned down to gentle embers, casting a soft, warm glow over the room. Thomas had slept soundly through the night, the scarf still wrapped snugly around his neck, and Alina had dozed in a chair nearby, feeling the kind of rest she hadn't known in months. Even Rusty, the friendly dog, lay curled up at her feet, his breathing slow and steady. When Alina awoke, she felt an unfamiliar lightness in her chest. The day before, she had been weighed down by worry, loneliness, and fear, but now, surrounded by warmth, safety, and kindness, she felt hope beginning to bloom. She quietly stirred, careful not to wake Thomas, and watched the soft light from the fire reflecting off the snow-covered windows. Daniel was already awake, tending to the small fire to make sure it stayed warm, his movements quiet and steady. Alina rose and stretched, taking a deep breath of the crisp cabin air. "Good morning, Daniel," she said softly. Daniel looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Alina. You slept well, I hope." "Better than I have in a long time," she admitted, smiling faintly. "Thank you." He nodded. "I'm glad. There's breakfast ready, simple, but it will give you energy for the day." She glanced at Thomas, who was just beginning to stir, rubbing his eyes and yawning. "Thomas, wake up, sweetheart," she whispered. "Breakfast is ready." Thomas opened his eyes, blinking at the soft light, and smiled when he saw Daniel. "Can I have some cookies too?" he asked, half joking, remembering the treats from the day before. Daniel laughed. "No cookies for breakfast, Thomas, but there's plenty of food to make you strong. We can have cookies after the meal if you like." As they ate together, Alina felt a sense of normalcy she hadn't known for months. There was no rush, no fear, no need to worry about the cold or hunger, just the simple pleasure of sharing a meal in a safe, warm place. Thomas chattered about the snow outside, about Rusty, and about the games he wanted to play later. Alina listened, laughing softly at his excitement, feeling a warmth in her heart she hadn't realized she had been missing. After breakfast, Daniel suggested they take a short walk outside. "The snow is beautiful," he said. "It's quiet, peaceful. Sometimes it helps to step outside and feel it for yourself." Alina hesitated for a moment, worrying about Thomas catching cold again, but Daniel reassured her. "We'll be careful. It's not too cold and you'll be wrapped warmly." Bundled in coats, scarves, and gloves, Alina and Thomas followed Daniel outside. The The snow crunched under their boots and the cold air made their cheeks rosy. The world seemed magical, glistening in shades of white and silver. Thomas ran ahead, laughing as Rusty bounded beside him, leaving small paw and boot prints in the snow. Alina watched them, her heart full of quiet joy. Daniel walked beside her, keeping a steady pace. "It's good to see him so happy," he said softly. "Kids should have moments like this where everything feels safe and wonderful." Alina nodded. "I've been afraid he wouldn't have moments like this again," she admitted. "After everything, the fire, losing his father, losing our home, I've worried I can't give him enough happiness." Daniel looked at her, his expression serious but kind. "Alina, you've given him more than you realize. You've given him love, safety, and hope. Those are more important than any material thing. Today is proof that he's happy because of you, and that's a gift that will last." Alina felt tears welling up in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude, not sadness. She had spent so long fearing the future, fearing the cold, and fearing that she couldn't provide for Thomas. But now, walking in the snow, surrounded by kindness and warmth, she realized that hope could grow again. Thomas ran ahead, stopping to catch snowflakes on his tongue and laughing as Rusty jumped around him. Alina smiled at the sight, feeling a sense of wonder she hadn't felt in years. The simple joys, the laughter of her son, the snow, the warmth of a friendly cabin were more precious than anything money could buy. After their walk, they returned to the cabin, cheeks rosy and hearts light. Daniel suggested they spend the afternoon preparing a small Christmas meal together. "It's not fancy," he said, "but it will be fun, and we can enjoy it as a family." Alina hesitated, feeling unsure if she could impose, but Daniel's calm assurance and the joy in Thomas's eyes made her feel that it was okay. "We would love that," she said softly. Inside, they worked together, Alina chopping vegetables while Daniel tended the stove. Thomas helped where he could, stirring small bowls and tasting ingredients. Laughter filled the cabin as they shared stories and jokes, and Alina realized she had not felt this sense of belonging in months. It was simple, quiet, and perfect. As the meal cooked, Daniel began to tell stories about his life on the ranch. Alina listened, fascinated as he spoke about the animals, the changing seasons, and the small adventures he had experienced. Thomas asked questions, his eyes wide with wonder. Alina found herself laughing genuinely, the sound of it brightening the cabin like sunlight. When the meal was ready, they sat together at the small wooden table. The food was simple but hearty, and the joy of sharing it made it taste even better. Alina looked at Daniel and then at Thomas and felt a deep sense of gratitude. For the first time in a long time, she felt that life could be good again. After the meal, they sat by the fire once more. Thomas had drifted off to sleep, his small body resting peacefully, the scarf still snug around his neck. Alina held him gently, feeling his warmth against her chest. Daniel watched them quietly, a small smile on his face. Alina whispered softly, "I don't know how to thank you enough, Daniel. You've given us so much warmth, safety, hope. I don't know what we would have done without you." Daniel shook his head. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "Seeing Thomas happy, seeing you at peace, that's more than enough. That's the best gift I could ask for this Christmas." Alina felt a tear slip down her cheek, but this time it was a tear of joy. She realized that kindness could transform lives, even in the darkest times. Daniel had shown her that, and in doing so, he had given her a gift far greater than anything she could have imagined. As night fell again, Alina tucked Thomas into bed, careful not to disturb his peaceful sleep. She looked around the cabin, feeling a sense of wonder at how much life could change in a single day. A stranger's kindness had brought warmth, laughter, and hope back into their lives. She knew challenges would come again, but she also knew that they could face them with courage, love, and the support of people who cared. Daniel sat quietly by the fire, Rusty resting at his feet. Alina approached him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Daniel," she whispered again. "You've given us more than words can say. You've given us hope, and that's something we'll never forget." Daniel smiled softly, looking at her with steady eyes. "It's nothing," he said. "Just a reminder that even small acts of kindness can change the world. You and Thomas are strong, and I'm glad I could help in a small way." Alina nodded, feeling the weight of the past year lift slightly from her shoulders. She realized that Christmas was not about gifts or decorations. It was about warmth, compassion, and the people who stand by you when you need it most. And in this small cabin with a kind man, a playful dog, and her sleeping son, she felt that the true meaning of Christmas had finally found her. Before they slept that night, Alina whispered to Thomas, "You see, sweetheart, even in the hardest times, good things can happen. People can surprise you with kindness, and hope can return when you least expect it." Thomas, half asleep, murmured, "I like Mr. Daniel, he's nice." Alina smiled, brushing his hair gently. "Yes, he is, and we are lucky to have him today. Remember, Thomas, kindness is always worth remembering." Outside, the snow continued to fall silently, blanketing the world in quiet beauty. Inside the cabin, warmth, love, and hope filled every corner. Alina, Thomas, and Daniel knew that life would continue with its challenges, but they also knew that together, with compassion and care, they could face anything. And so, that Christmas, which had begun with cold and loneliness, ended with warmth, friendship, and the comforting realization that even strangers could become family in the most unexpected and wonderful ways. It was a day that Alina and Thomas would never forget, a day when kindness transformed their lives and reminded them that hope, love, and human connection are the greatest gifts of all.